positive people.
Good evening.
Buenos tardes. Buenos noches.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bon dia.
Bon dia.
Ni hao.
Ni hao.
Memenjes.
Memenjes.
Dobre utro.
Dobre utro.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Sawadi.
Sawadi.
Chawim.
Chawim.
Manga nangu manga.
Manga namu manga.
That's Filipino. Como ye?
Como ye?
Sopa wanang sung.
Sopa wanam song.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Privet.
Privet.
Guten Tag.
Guten Tag.
Calamara.
Calamara.
And as they say in Hebrew, shalom.
Shalom.
Which means peace. When you think of the hate you give, hate does not discriminate, and it comes from all different cultures and different backgrounds. That's the reason why I just greeted you in different languages from different cultures. Because hate is something that embodies our spirit as human beings. And it affects a lot of our young children, and affects our children, and for some reason, it continues to breed generation after generation. So today, before we begin, I would like to welcome Sean Brooks, who's a high school senior at New London High School, STEM Magnet High School, and he was also MLK recipient. And he just received $20,000 to go to college for his senior year. And he's getting ready to attend Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia in the fall. All right, awesome. Sean, can you give us a few words about this incredible and insightful book? You can come right here to the podium, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. As he mentioned, my name is Sean Brooks, and I am from New London High School, and I am speaking for the voiceless, those who are voiceless. So the movie, The Hate You Give, was excellent, and I would say I can definitely relate to the character Starr, because there's many issues and points that were made in different like tangible ways. The first point that I noticed was the code switching, and for those that might not know, code switching is, for at least me and for other people of color, is to survive through white spaces. So in the movie, Starr had to act a certain way at her private school, where her majority white peers, she had to act. She didn't want to be the stereotype. She didn't want to be the stereotype or be known as like the ghetto black girl, but she had to act a certain way, change her vocabulary. Just change really her aura and her atmosphere, just so she had to change her aura just so she can prove like those notions about her people and about her race that she's ghetto or whatever isn't true. And then when she got home to her family in her community, then she could be herself, and then she can act normal. So that really took I could really relate to, because I attend, as Mr. Booker mentioned, magnet school. So being from New London, Connecticut, I'm surrounded by students from outer district, and predominantly those students are from whiter communities. So even though I go to a public school that's very diverse, I still have to navigate through the white spaces with the majority of the white teachers and the students. So I always feel like I have to code switch, not even just at school, but wherever I go, whether it's at my job, just so I won't be the stereotype, and just so I can just prove people wrong in silence and unconsciously. And there was also another point that was hit, was the police brutality, and I definitely could relate to that, because at times police in my community, they may patrol myself or my other friends that are black, just because, if they're wearing a hoodie or the color of their skin. And it was very unique or interesting that Starr knew in the movie to put her hands on the dashboard when she was getting pulled over with her friend Khalil. But Khalil didn't consciously realize that. He said, why? I'm not doing anything. I don't have anything in my hand. I know I'm innocent, so why should I put my hand on the dashboard? And so he's thinking, which is granted, because he's thinking, as a human, that his humanity, he knows he's not doing anything wrong, so why should this cop, suspect him of that? But there were so many different talking points and points in this movie that it related so much in my life and to many other people of color's lives, and just everyone, that I just can't wait to further discuss on this panel. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. Sean, thank you.
Thank you.
So Sean Brooks, he highlighted a very, very crucial point, which was code switching and how some people of color have to navigate through white spaces. So Malik Champlain, who's a poet, he also has a company called Passion, Hunger, Drive. And Malik, if you can bless us with a poem before we go into our panel, I would greatly appreciate it. Let's give Malik Champlain a round of applause. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I wonder what you think when I say Black Lives Matter. I wonder what you see when a group of black people gather. Streets in the air, fists in the air, and the locking arms. On the loudspeaker screaming, I'm black and I'm strong. I'm black and I'm proud. And when it comes to injustice, I refuse to be quiet. I'm black and I'm loud. See, when I was about 16, my mother took me on a walk. This was the moment I knew we were going to have to talk. But as the tears rolled down her cheeks, I knew this wasn't a talk about the birds and the bees. Nah, this was talk about black men and police. This was the talk about how not to get shot and left for dead in the street. You see, year after year, black parents had to carry this burden, turning boys into soldiers, preparing them for a war they're not equipped to win. Natural born suspect from the color of my skin. Now you see, don't get me wrong, because when I say Black Lives Matter, I also mean those black guys telling black lies about how living in the hood is better. You see, this is the new black. Nah, I mean the old black. I mean to go back to school, get the education, and buy your hood back. I mean, learn a trade, start a business, make sure your community is elevated. Because when I say Black Lives Matter, I look at you. But when you hear Black Lives Matter, what will you do? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malik. Appreciate you. Black Lives Matter. And in 1968, roughly 51 years ago, before Martin Luther King died, in Memphis, Tennessee, the gentlemen who were sanitation workers, they had around their necks, I am a man. What is the difference between 1968 and now in 2019? I am a man, Black Lives Matter, 51 years later. So when you think about the concept of why we're here, The Hate You Give, this phenomenal book, this book that shed light on many issues. One of the things I have to thank Malik Champlain, because 3 months ago, he gave me a call. He said, Kevin. I said, yeah, Malik. He said, I got this idea. I was like, what's that, Malik? He said, I want to have a discussion on the book, The Hate You Give. And I said, are you serious? He said, absolutely. He said, because we need to have this discussion. We really do. He said, I don't want just black people in the room. I want to have a discussion with everyone, because this is something that we need to focus on and we need to tackle as a community. And he's absolutely right. So I want to thank you, Malik. Thank you very much for everything. Let's give him a round of applause, please. Thank you. So for my extraordinary, insightful, and dedicated and committed social justice activists on this panel, because I really have a lot of respect for all of you on this panel, can you please introduce yourself before we begin? And who you are, your name, and who you are, and where you're from.
My name's Melanie Palladoro. I'm from Lenox, Massachusetts. I am a mom and a mentor, and I'm not only concerned for my children, but for the children in my community.
Thank you.
My name is Sean Brooks. I am from New London, Connecticut. Like I said before, I speak for the voiceless, and I'm a brother, a mentor, and hopefully future president, 2050.
2050, okay. All right.
My name is Julia Simpson, and I am a member of the book club here at the Groton Library, semi-retired, and I just moved here to Groton. I'm originally from Rhode Island, lived there for many years, but I grew up on a farm in the Midwest, so my life experiences are totally different from anybody on the East Coast. I love the book, and I'm excited about being here tonight.
Awesome, thank you.
My name is Trey, Trevon Taylor, and I'm just concerned about what's going on in the world today.
My name is Malik Champlain, and I like to say that I'm the unspoken words of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. I represent the brothers that rock chains and those that write checks.
Thank you. Please give them a round of applause. Awesome. The hate you give. Why do you when I think of the hate you give, I think of Tupac Shakur. And Tupac Shakur, I was a big fan of his. I wouldn't be standing here today if it wasn't for Tupac Shakur. Because I remember when I was in high school watching him do videos. And I think about a poem that he said. He said, when he was 15 years old, he wrote this poem called The Rose That Grew from Concrete. And he said, did you ever hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's laws wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else even cared. And that's what he's talking about, that hate. And even though with all that hate that people give off, you still have some people that are able to blossom from all that. So what I want to know from my awesome panelists here, why do you think we give off so much hate? And when you think about hate, have you ever given off hate before to someone that was different than you? And how did it make you feel when you recognized your own thoughts and actions that were negative? Malik.
I say that to answer that question, I think you have to be very vulnerable, right, with the audience and yourself about understanding the multitudes of where hate comes from and where it's breeded. So for me, I would have to say what comes to mind when I think about that is there was a point in time when I was younger, I want to say, about Trey and Sean's age, when I reciprocated hate with hate, right? So kind of like Tupac, right? When he started off earlier in life, he had a lot of anger and energy that he got from the world, and he reciprocated that in his lyrics and in his delivery. But because what do you do with that anger? What do you do with those microaggressions? What do you do with the being ostracized? What do you do with wanting only to fit in and be accepted, yet not understanding the blessing that you have, right? So when I was, when Sean was talking and he was speaking about having the, being able to code switch, it used to be a obligation, it used to be a burden. But for me, it's a privilege. Because just as well as I can walk into white spaces and know how to, the cultural norms and the colloquialisms when I'm there, the same way that I can go into other environments, right, and more of my common language, right, and understand that in other environments know how to move there as well. So my adaptability is there, right? And I felt that when I was growing up, when those things were seen as unpopular, right, not fitting in with the cultural norms, then that made me feel this anger inside, right? If I was, I think, Mark Twain talks about the two most important days of your life are the day that you're born and the day you find out why, right? And I think for black people, the two hardest days of your life, right, are the day that you understand that you're different than everybody because you're black, and the day that someone tells you that in a negative way, right? So so if I ask Sean or maybe Trey or Booker or somebody, when was the first time someone called you, right? That's not written in sand, that's sketched in stone. And when I was younger, when I was 16, 17, if you did that, it's automatically gonna be a broken nose for you, right? But as I got older, I started understanding more about life, and that, Julie, you were talking about people having different backgrounds and coming from different areas and not knowing, right? And how sad it is versus me absorbing that energy and keeping it in, that I would just look at people when they would express that stuff to me as like ignorant, as the idea that my job isn't to prove to you anything. You don't know me, because if you did, you wouldn't refer to me that way. That's personally your problem. So I'm gonna allow you to keep the hate instead of allowing you to give it to me.
Now, you mentioned adaptability, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I think about students that I know, and Trey and Sean, if you can comment a little bit on this, you know, students to say, well, that's being white, that's acting white. I don't know why I can't just be myself, right? Have you ever been in one of those situations where you're navigating through your school and you feel that you have to act a certain way and you can't really be yourself? Like Starr was, you know, because you know when Starr was navigating through school, so she would leave her community where she lived, right? And then when she would go to her school, which was predominantly all white, she had to pretend and put this mask on and pretend that she was someone else. And then she would take her mask off when she would go to her community. Have you ever had to deal with those situations, either one of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I think when you're younger, or when especially getting into high school in a new environment, I would say I had to deal with those situations, you know, not only with students, but, you know, with adults as well, because you're still, you have to walk in, you know, because different adults have different perceptions or how they perceive you as, and especially with me, not only I'm black, but I have dreads, so it's like there's so many stigmas that come with that, so I'm always like have to constantly like wear a mask just to prove people wrong and prove their perceptions wrong, and that's like an everyday, you know, process.
Okay, thank you. Trey?
From 7 to about 9, I moved around a lot for about 4 different houses, and I had to go to a charter school, Detroit Merit Academy, and you know, like I could understand a lot what she was going through, like far as passing the nice houses in the neighborhood, because I lived on 6 Mile.
Wow.
And so it's like that's kind of like emotional.
Right.
But yeah, I understand what she's saying when she said she had to put on a mask, because I looked at my 5th grade graduation pic like the other day, or yesterday actually, because after I watched the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was only 7 black kids.
7?
Detroit Merit Academy.
Wow.
So it's like
And how
hearing
did
you
that make you feel every day?
I mean, you learn to adapt to it. It's nothing you can do, really.
Right.
So it's like
So you connected to Starr's character.
from the beginning of the movie to the end.
Right, and you know, what memories did that bring back to you when you were going through that as a young?
I got teary.
You did?
Yeah.
And why is that?
Because I understand the pain that she was going through, and that you really do have to put on when you get around a bunch of different people, you have to put on that mask.
And how old are you now?
I'm 20 now. Just
You're
turned
20
20
now.
December 2nd.
Right. So that was what, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
And you remember that vividly, like what you were
Clear
going
as day.
through. And so when you think about it, how does it make you feel to know that there are kids younger than you right now who are 3, 4, 5 years old who will go through that same pain?
It hurts. But like I said again, it's like it's nothing you can do about it, because that's the world we live in.
So, you know, when I think about Melanie here, and I think about you, Julia, and you're taking this in, and both of you, you know, grew up in white communities, and you're navigating through those spaces as white women who are conscious in reading this book. How does this make you feel to hear these 3 men and the pain they're expressing right now? These 3 men of color expressing their pain about their journey. And what do you think we can do? I mean, what can you do in your community to bring more consciousness to individuals who are like they're overreacting? It's not really going on.
Well, first of all, I think as a mom, to hear that, it breaks my heart. And knowing that Trayvon and my daughter's friends go through those situations is shocking. And I think that discussions like this and conversations with our children at home is where it has to start. And I've talked to friends about this, that, you know, I didn't know where to start or what to do as a mom and not being involved in my community as much. And it just started with conversations with people, whether it was my kids' friends at home, or now I'm mentoring in an elementary school and I'm dealing with guidance counselors and adjustment counselors, and it's just kind of expanded from there.
Right.
And that's where it starts, is by having conversations and discussing it.
Thank you.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I taught high school for 12 years in Massachusetts. It was a small community, Seekonk, Massachusetts. It was mostly white. So talking about the experiences that I've had, I would say anger comes mostly from fear. I mean, not understanding and not having those discussions. So even though there weren't that many black students in my class, I knew a number of, we worked with the Gay Lesbian Alliance in our school. And so we saw that kind of interaction all the time, and we had those discussions, and I felt there was something happening there, that there was a good, strong group of kids who were supporting each other, and that was happening in the school. One other thing that as we go, I'm reading this, and I was an English teacher. So for me, this book, and I said this earlier, it's almost like it's a modern Mockingbird for me, To Kill a Mockingbird.
And why do you say that, Julia?
Because the book gives you this amazing description of this community, the good and the bad, and how she was affected by it, this family, just as Mockingbird does, and she awakens to what she needs to do and who she needs to be. And even Scout saw both sides, she had this, she loved the black community, and she had this family. So she was also there was this dichotomy for her too. But I guess what I want to say is, for me, now that I'm semi-retired, I am more reading, and I'm watching and listening to these guys, and involved with the Me Too movement and the women's movement. There are so many problems, right? We are living in these, and I've said this, we have so many walls in our own country that we have to break down. So these discussions, we need more of this. We need more cultural, we need more diversity. Even talking to you about what happened this weekend with the young men, the Kentucky group in DC, you can just say they were ignorant, but were they? They didn't know, I'm sure, that Native American man, and I'm not going to give them any ground at all. What I'm saying is, there was a lot of misunderstanding in that situation that was going on, and it's because of things like this that we don't know each other enough.
Right. Listening to you, Julia, something resonated with me. You said the walls in our own country we have to break down.
Yes.
And when you walk in any cafeteria in the United States, any college, any high school, elementary school, middle school, you'll see the black students sit in one little section, white students sit in another section, the Latin students sit in another section, Asian students in another section, and you might have one table where you have a few different cultures and races in one group. And then what happens is these students grow up and they graduate from college and they get educated, and then what happens? Accessibility, access. And Martin Luther King had the 5 pillars, and he talks about access to economics. He talks about access to having opportunities. But you feel only comfortable with people you're around. And who's going to come through that, who you're going to allow in that door. So the question I think of, when I think of you awesome panelists here, is when we talk about access, and we talk about the whole concept of white privilege. Some of my colleagues would say, well, Kevin, I don't know. I worked really hard. I worked very hard. Is there such thing as white privilege? And if so, do you benefit, for some of my white colleagues who are on this panel, from certain societal advantages. Please.
Can I say? So we talked about this before. So the first time that a couple years ago someone said to me, a friend said, we were discussing race and injustice, and he discussed white privilege, and when he first said it, I was offended. I thought, I am not privileged. Like, I don't
You said,
think.
what did you say? You said you're not what?
I am not privileged.
Oh, you got to speak in the microphone there. Yeah.
I don't think like I'm privileged. I don't act like I'm privileged. I was insulted. And I was getting angry in the conversation, and he said, don't get angry. Get educated. Learn about it, read about it, educate yourself about it. So I did. And as I bought a book that was called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum. And in part of the book, she talks about a study that was done by a white graduate, female college student that was interviewing other high school graduates that were in college, expected from their families to graduate college, get jobs, and/or get married. And several of them had experienced abusive relationships or personal difficulties throughout their high school life and going into college. And all of their stories were interspersed with good luck stories of obtaining apartments without deposits, or getting jobs without having any former experience. And none of them attributed that to being white. And as I was thinking about that for myself, that I didn't realize, and then looking into race and prejudice and white privilege, I realized that systematically I just was privileged because I was born into this skin. It wasn't because I wanted to be privileged. It was just how society viewed me. And then in my own life, I realized that my own job, I had no experience in the dental field, and I'm a dental assistant now. I'm an office manager of that practice. But he trained me without any experience, and then I was able to get certified. And so absolutely, there's white privilege.
But Melanie, I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a minute here. Some people would say you just lucked out, like it's not about your race or your color. You just had good luck, and you just ran into the right person, and they helped you out, and they gave you an opportunity. How would you say that's really white privilege?
You could say it's good luck, but would that have happened if I were a person of color? I don't know.
Julia?
So one experience that happened to me when I was young that showed me that I was maybe luckier than other people. When I was a junior in college, I had a roommate from Iran. Mm-hmm. She was a woman. She was in engineering. At that time, the Shah, it was a horrible time to be from there. It was the late 1970s. So she was a woman in engineering, and she was Iranian. And she had 3 strikes against her. Every day she went to school, and young men would yell at her. And she would be in this class. She was one of the only women in this. She was in computer engineering. But every day, she was my lesson. She went in every day, and she didn't let it faze her at all. So that was a positive experience for me. These young men have talked about the negative things that are happening to them, and I'm like, whoa, I know I haven't been ostracized at work. I only sometimes maybe as a woman or as an older woman, maybe I was, but you handle that. I feel, when you hear this, that they've had to deal with this all their lives, it does break your heart, because you realize that you haven't had to deal with that at all. And you grow up in a small area where you're just like everybody else, and to know that other people have to other mothers like me have to tell their children to worry about them so much when they walk out that door, it's heartbreaking. Yeah.
Malik, I know you want to add on to this. I can see it in your face. I know.
We are, as chaotic as times can feel like right now, we're actually in a point, maybe besides my biased feelings of the president, but we're actually in a point where we're supposed to be at, though. We've been playing the Bird Box Challenge for the last 2 decades, and we've been blinded, not seeing each other, or this is me being nice, but if you want me to be frank, but it's my white counterparts not seeing me for who I actually am, but wanting me to see me as them. And that's not who I am. And wanting me to not acculturate, but to assimilate into their cultural norms and society, right? So at this point, what's happening is what happens when growth happens. It's friction. That's what happens when I see you for the first time and my preconceived notions about you are not true. And I want them to be, though. And I have to change. Because doing the same thing over and over and nothing happening for change is insanity. So where we're at is we're at a place where we're seeing each other, and now it's like, but I thought this was how you were supposed to act, or this was what society was. So what's bothering us sometimes is the wording, right? Even in writings, going back, I know you said being an English teacher, but in writings going back into when I was in school, it was normal for the character to be white, so you didn't have to say it. You described the black character or the brown character or somebody else. But now that you're in a position now where we're sharing closer spaces, where people of color are going more outside of cities and into rural and suburban areas, and we're sharing these spaces, we have to learn how to be together and what the other person is experiencing and what it is that we're bringing or not bringing to the table. So when we say things like when I say the word white, right? Some of my white counterparts feel a certain way, regardless of what it is. So in this context, we're talking about white privilege. When I say Black Lives Matter, right? It is the version today of what it was in 1775 when Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." But when white people say it, it's fine. It seems as patriotic. But when a black person says Black Lives Matter, that is the same thing, right? But it doesn't feel right because in certain societies, right, me trying to once again be nicely say my white counterparts, race is not spoken about as much. So that friction is on their end because I deal with race every day and speaking about it, understanding it, and that's my cultural norm. So now that my cultural norm is starting to become, and we're blending together, the idea is that how can we get to a point where we understand and we're listening, where we have empathy, compassion for each other, because we have as much to learn, right, from each other in both aspects. Because if I can understand where you're coming from and you can understand where I'm coming from, then we're in a better place. So when someone brings up white privilege, to kind of summarize this up, what we're talking about is not anything you worked for. I get it. People work hard. But white privilege is not about what somebody worked for, right? It's about something that was given to you at birth, right? That gives you this access, right, to society that people of color don't necessarily have the benefit of. So like in the movie, right, when Starr's in the car, right, and what's the name of the boy she was in the car with?
Chris.
Khalil, right? And Khalil assumed he had his Bill of Rights. Yeah. Khalil assumed that when my grandmother was growing up, she understood, right, that she was going to school when white and black students weren't going to school together. Right? When my mother was going to school, she understands, right, her place at times. When I was raised up, you can't raise me to know that I'm equal, to see myself as equal, and then when I want equal treatment, right, life punches me in the face and lets me know that that's not it. And what he did is what a lot of brothers do in the hood, which is, I'm a man like you're a man, right? My skin's no different than your skin, and I should be able to question. I should be able to have the same rights and be seen just as guilty or innocent as the next man, right? But in those situations, whenever I'm talking about white privilege with somebody and they don't really want to see it, I go, when you're stopped by the police, when you drive every time to put your key in your car, do you think about whether or not you're going to come home tonight? That's the privilege.
Yeah, exactly.
And the way that you combat it, though, and I know I'm talking for a long time, but the way that you combat it is this, right? And I get it, like, well, what do I do then, right? I can't do it. What do I say, okay, I'm not going to give you the answer, but I'll give you an example. In the movie The Help, Emily Stone and Octavia Spencer both played in it. Emily Stone, at one point, because people don't talk about money, but at one point she found out Octavia Spencer was getting paid a lot less than her. And historically, black female actresses get paid less than white female actresses. And she went to the director and said, the movie's not moving forward unless you pay this lady what she deserves. Not more, not what she deserves. And what that is that's weaponizing your privilege to help somebody else who doesn't have that privilege.
So are you saying that's good or bad?
That's good.
Okay.
Because
Weaponizing
you're
makes it sound negative.
you're taking it, right, and you're using it against the system.
Okay, because that weaponizing makes it sound negative. I've heard that as an ally, do they call them allies?
Right.
Yeah. Can I just ask one question then? Khalil knew what he should have done and chose not to that night? That was my one thing about this book. Why did he do that?
Right. If I leave here today and I'm stopped by a police officer, you get to ask yourself a question. Do I want my dignity or do I want to live?
Yeah.
And some days I want my dignity.
Okay. So
some days when I'm leaving Walmart and they want to check only my bag, right? Some days I'm not always polite because every day you're asking me to have a smile on my face. Because see, I'm 6'6". I used to time myself to smile every 5 seconds in predominantly white spaces because I would be referred to and people would tell me, oh, I thought you was an angry black guy.
Oh, well.
I still do it now when I'm at work. You change up to survive, but what you feel like is that you're saying to yourself, you're saying inside, who I am and where I come from is less important than what is you feel about me. When that's the furthest thing from the truth. And some days you're just like, give me liberty or give me death.
When you mentioned Octavia Spencer and Emily Stone, and pay this lady what she deserves, and recognizing the fact that people of color are treated differently. And there's a scene in the movie where Starr's friends are protesting because of Khalil, and Khalil passes away. And they go outside their school and they're protesting, and then she has an epiphany at this point where she's like, they just don't get it.
Right.
They just don't get it. And she's walking through her school and she's walking through and she's seeing all the white students in her school listening to hip hop, wearing the new latest trend sneakers, and they're equating urban culture to black culture. And, it's interesting, Malik, you always say this as well. Everybody wants to be black except when they have to be black. So in the book, The Hate U Give, the main character tries to hide her cultural norms when students around her strive to add them to their daily life. Is there a difference between blacks and whites when it comes to cultural norms and the way we have to navigate through those spaces? And why do you think so? Why do you think? Because it goes back to privilege in some aspects, right? But even with students, and this goes to Trey and Sean, why do you feel like there is a difference?
Well, I believe there's a difference because, in the, not just the movie, but, white people, they can appropriate the culture. And for example, just like the Catch Me Outside girl, she was, you know, disrespecting her mother on national television on Dr. Phil. But had the roles been reversed and that had been a black girl, then she would have been condemned, and it would just, she wouldn't have gotten the you know, the praise that she would have now. So it's just like, you know, some have the privilege to, you know, accept the culture and to, you know, be in the culture and to praise the culture, but it's like I can't even praise my own culture because I would be seen like as a thug or typical or gangster. So there is definitely a difference.
Thank you.
I think it comes from being afraid. Just like Starr, you don't want people to know about that, you know, that side of you, you know,
Right.
because she was, you know, that's why, you know, I connected with her because she's from the hood, you know, or the ghetto, and
Right.
I'm from the ghetto. You don't want people to know that about you, so you just put on that act and you be like, oh, you know, like that. So I think it just comes from being afraid and intimidated.
Afraid and intimidated.
Yeah. Because I don't want you to know about my home life. Because I grew up with, you know, I have 8 siblings, 5 brothers and 3 sisters.
Right.
And we lived. You don't want nobody to know that. So when people ask to come over, it's like, no. Can we go over your house? You know. So.
And why? Is it because of the stereotypes of what people may think of black and brown people? Like, what are you intimidated? What are you afraid of? Allowing them to see? Is it the fact that, you know, they're going to buy into the stereotypes, or like, what do you think people are trying to hide a lot of times, or they don't want people to see?
Just the different side, because, you know, when you go into the suburbs, you don't see what you see in the hood. You don't see people standing on the corner with different color rags, or, you know, but to me, it was every day. It didn't affect me. Those, you know, so say if I bring someone like, you know, no offense, someone like her, you know, so it's different. I think that's really it.
So then it goes back to that question I asked earlier, right? So why do you think it's cool, you know, to adapt, to get a, you know, to take on those black cultural norms,
Yeah.
of what you see like in urban culture, right? But yet you don't want someone to really completely get to know the way you live.
Yeah.
But it's cool for them to have on the sneakers or listen to the music with you. And I even hear some students now even use the N-word who may not be black or brown. So I mean, please help us out here. I mean, if you can expand on that, Trey.
I think that's just the times. I think. I don't think
And
that.
how does that make you feel, being a student, right? Because it's part of your generation now. And if you hear another white student, right, someone your age group.
Wait, are you talking about like now or like when I was 16?
Now, right now, when you're 20 years old, Sean, you're 18 years old, 17 years old, would you? How would it make you feel?
It probably won't affect me now as it did when I was 16 or
Okay.
17, because I was a loose cannon. I didn't care about anything because my dad had just died, and I didn't care about any of that. But now, I see it's just a change. It's times. It goes along with everything, just like generation. That's why it's like people say we got to break the chain. That's why I honestly, personally don't think that we're going to do it, because it's been going on for so long and so long and so long.
Wow.
So,
Okay, thank you.
welcome.
Sean?
Just thinking of it just gets me livid. Just because
Hard discussion.
I think a lot of, as Trey mentioned, the times are changing, especially I believe with the youth, especially with like the black and brown youth, like they don't really understand like the just not they don't understand like the oppression. I think because it's so codified, everything's so covered up and covert, and everything's so codified that it's like, oh, we don't have racism, we're not segregated anymore, but we have racism. I feel like to let other groups, you know, use the N-word or appropriate it is very disrespectful, just because, you know, your ancestors were called that and dehumanized, and your people are still being dehumanized. So just like having like the quote unquote oppressors, you know, saying, you know, the N-word or giving them a pass is really like it's really not needed, and it's just like it's a little trigger, because that's like the new thing now all over social media, and when you do call them out, it's like, oh, you're being too sensitive. So it's with the times, and then it's like people are just like the youth are like forgetting, like, oh, we're at some progress, but it's like we still have an elephant in the room. Just because some went around the elephant doesn't mean the elephant isn't there. We just went around it, but we still. There's just so much that goes into it.
Malik?
Sean, I think you make a lot of sense. I think a lot of it is that year after year, and I'm talking from integration into schools, black students have gotten less and less knowledge of self. So when you have less and less knowledge of self and you don't know your roots or where your people came from, where you come from, or the meaning of things and why things are, then you're just going to exist. And what happens is that the same thing as you say, everybody wants to be black except for when you have to be black, is the same thing is that, yeah, the N-word's cool for you to say until you put an R at it, until you put an R at the end, and then we're at a party somewhere in the woods and I'm the only black person at the party. Because I see that consistently, right? And it's like, oh, now the roles are reversed. Now it's a problem, but it wasn't a problem before because you thought it was funny, right? And when I look at this, like, everybody wants to be black, like, you have to, if we equate, at this point, we really equate black culture with urban and hip-hop culture a lot of times. And with that being said, in so many examples we have, it's not until, right, it's not until white people accept black culture that it's accepted for us to have. So if I don't know, if I don't know my full self is acceptable to you, then what happens is that if I bring you home, you might look at me different. Because what happens is I have to give you a peek behind the mask. Because it's a mask every time I walk into a room. Every time I learn this dance, I learn this act, I learn, right, what to say and not to say, what to accept and not to accept. It's a dance, right? Like even right, I work in the real world, right? And it's the same thing. But as being somebody whose name Malik, my name means king. I was born in Brooklyn, 1985, Afrocentric. I understand who I am because my mother taught me that. So I'm not afraid to talk the way I talk because if you question me, I have the degrees and knowledge to back that up, right? If you go to where I'm from and we're playing spades and dominoes and there's Kool-Aid and fried chicken, I'm not going to be mad or afraid of the vulnerability of that, what that comes with, because I know who I am.
Fried chicken?
Huh? But you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Because I'm not going to be worried about the stereotype you have of me eating watermelon or doing whatever else, because I didn't make it. I'm not going to own it, nor am I going to allow that to dictate any room in my life or any energy in how I operate. So when you go into my office, right, you're going to see Barack in the building, and you're going to see LeBron, and you're going to see a picture of Jay-Z, because it's all me. But you're also going to see books from whether it's Mark Twain or Timothy Keller, because I'm a Christian, right? All these things that I have, right? Because I'm eclectic, and all of it is me. And I'm not going to be ashamed anymore of what that looks like, right? But too many times we're ashamed because we're not unapologetically black, right? But once breaking the chains, right? That's when you are who I am, because guess what? If you're allowed to be who you are, then I'm gonna be who I am in the same space. And if that makes you uncomfortable, you're the one with the problem, right? And I'm going to walk and talk that way, right? Because I have knowledge of self and where I come from, right? And I don't need you to validate me. That has nothing negative against to say about anybody. But once I understood that, right? That's why Sean knows when I talk to him, I tell him, yo, when you get up there and talk, you talk with some pride. You understand where you come from. You understand the greatness that you have flown in your DNA, right? And when I go through that and I understand that, it doesn't matter if I'm in a boardroom, operating room, or classroom. I'm going to walk and talk that way. And that's something that we're missing. And that's something that's hard to obtain if you don't know who you are, right, in this society. And you're always trying to prove to somebody else, well, you know, black is good. Black is beautiful. I know that. The idea is that when you're ready, I'll let you see it.
You said something like, if you don't know who you are. And in the movie and also in the book, the father really instills, you know, the 10-point system with his children, with the Black Panther Party. And there's also a scene in the movie and also in the book as well, when the father he questions the fact that he's like, oh, you're bringing this white boy home. You know, you're bringing this other man home of another race, where he didn't even want to acknowledge this man at first because he's thinking about all the pain and the struggles that he has gone through as a black man in this society. So the question I have for some of my panelists here who are parents, you know, when you think about, you know, instilling in your children, what you instill in your children, you know, how would you feel if your child brought someone home of another race? And how would, you guys are funny. And how would you help them navigate through all the hate and the negative energy that they will probably receive throughout their entire life if they decide to be with this person and be committed to this person? Because it is a journey. Melanie?
That's a loaded question. That's not a quick answer. But can I just add something to what
Please.
Malik was saying? There was also a part in the movie when Chris and Starr were in the limousine from prom. And I understood him trying to say to her, like, I'm not racist. I don't see color. And she said, if you don't see color, then you don't see who I am. Mm-hmm. And I think that with what Malik was saying was, if you don't see that person as a black woman or a black man and know their history and know the struggles that they've gone through, you don't know them. Mm-hmm. How could you? How could you understand?
Absolutely.
So, but as to your question, obviously, thank you. Obviously, yes, I have run into that situation. My daughter is in an interracial relationship, and to me, I never had a problem with it. I would like to say that I look at the person and who they are, what their heart is, what kind of a man is she bringing home, what is he bringing to the table for her. So I don't have a problem with.
And what about the struggle that they will have to endure? You know, because at the end of the day, you know, I don't know if he's a black man or Latin man, whatever, but if he's a man of color, the reality is he still has to navigate through these white spaces and with people who may not accept him for who he is as an individual. And she will also have to come to terms with that as well. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah,
Please.
The first time I actually met Sophia, I went over her house and we actually talked about
And who's Sophia?
My daughter.
Yeah, okay.
the one that's red right now. We had a conversation, and I think it was something it was Halloween, I remember, and we were sitting at her dining room table, and it was something along the lines where I think I had a rough life too, or I had a rough life, and I was like, so tell me what type of life you had. And
Right.
when she told me about everything, you know, I don't want to say no names, but told me about her past, and I actually started saying like, wow, maybe I had it bad too, you know, everybody has it bad. Mm-hmm. So, but I just didn't see that in her, you know, in her at first. Wow. So I made a judgment on her when I didn't know her full story. Mm. And when she explained to me, it was like, okay.
So when you first met her, what were your preconceived notions of her being a white female?
She has everything.
She has everything. You looked at the whole idea of where she lives, her community, as well. Mm-hmm. So I don't really want her to know who I am completely.
Yeah.
And what I'm going through, right?
Yeah. But recently we was just at my mom's house. My mom looks at her, my mom go right in the room, talk to her, you hungry, baby? All that.
Right.
So it's like, you know, so I don't, like with that, I don't see anything, you know.
Right.
Once you understand the person and, you know, I understand where she was coming from and I understand her background.
So you could relate to Starr's character when she was avoiding like bringing him home.
Yeah. Yeah, because at first we first started, I didn't live home with my mom.
Right.
I was living with my friend. So it was like, it was weird at first, but now we together. We all right.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Malik, I know you want to expand on that as well.
I mean, I'm the father of 2 beautiful daughters. And for me, I see, it's interesting how you can see where their feelings are coming from, because you know, like in Maverick's situation, the idea for him when he got to the core of it was nothing to do with Chris and everything to do with him. He felt like, and I think most fathers feel like, my daughter to get a man like her father, right? And sometimes we don't just say like to look like me, but that's part of who I am. Yeah. And I think especially being a black man, you're like, I'm not like a man, I'm always a black man, right? I usually rarely say like just I'm a black man. So then you're like, did I do such a poor job of being a good representation of what a black man is, that you just don't like black men, right? Like, is it because I got locked up, right? Like in the movie, is it because I didn't have this good job, or right? What did I do, right? He makes it all about him,
right?
And it's not until you really see like the concept that like it has nothing to do with you,
right?
And the idea is about, right, who the person is. We talk about King, and we talk about like Dr. Martin Luther King. His day just passed, and the content of their character, right, and the color of their skin being a bonus, right, and the idea that if this person's going to, for me at least, going to treat my daughter right, and I'm gonna ask some questions too though, because you're my man. You dating, right? Like, she's black, so you understand what comes with that. Right? You know what I'm saying? If y'all have kids, what comes with that? Right? Because you can't be naive. Right? Like, you could be in a world where you have white kids and be naive. You don't do that now. Don't go into the world and be like, you're going to have my grandchildren and you're going to think nothing is going to be said. Right. People might not treat them No, I need your eyes wide open. But those are those authentic conversations that you feel like you would have. Right? Even with, like, protecting my daughter. Like, look, for the last umpteen years, it's been my responsibility. Now, if I'm giving that to you, hey, I need to know if you can handle yourself. But secondly, right, the other part is I need to know that you understand, what comes with this, and if you're ready to step up, that like I'm with it.
Thank you, Julia. Please.
What I loved about the Maverick character was that he was there were so many dimensions to him. I mean, that family had a lot of problems,
Absolutely.
But they overcame them, or were working towards them, or just didn't give up, right? And that's why I just thought it just wasn't, you talk about knowing individuals, and I felt like they were all individuals, so that's all I wanted to say, but I just think,
They had a lot of
just
pride.
that's important.
They had a lot of pride in their family.
They did, but they also went through a lot of troubles.
Oh, absolutely.
And they had to overcome, 7 and having, what they went through, but they stuck through it.
I think for me, I relate so much to the father, because me being a father, and the way in which like I teach my children, right, and that understanding of knowing your surroundings, of understanding, right, like what should be and what actually is, right, and this persistence and never giving up on pushing for that respect and dignity that you deserve, and not handing in the towel, because sometimes you can do that. You can just see the world through this perspective of what it is and what it's going to stay like, not understanding that there's so much room and growth, and sometimes we get caught up in just like the glass being half empty. And it's like, no, like you have to be safe, because at the end of the day, like my oldest daughter, I got young ones, is 4. So like when that first scene in the movie, at least, and they bring up the scene of the talk, and you talk about like, police and where to put your hands and stuff like that. It's crazy, because I remember even reading the book, it had me thinking, but seeing the movie was just like emotional for me, because it's like, at what day do I have to crush her childhood and her innocence and have that conversation?
Right.
Right? Do I send her out there like naive? Or do I do it at 5? Do I do it at 7? Right? Like what day, right? What time? When do I have that conversation that little girl at recess is saying this because you're black? Right? And that breaks my heart because you right, this is my little princess. Mm-hmm. Like, she's innocent. I want her to live in this bubble. Mm-hmm. I want her to live in, right, this little environment where, like, she doesn't have to worry about driving and, right, like, and I don't have to drive myself crazy about thinking about these things that are far from happening. I got at least like 12 years, right? But it's just like, at what point do I have that conversation though? And I take, and because I know it was taken from me when I had it. And then I have to balance that. And I have to live with the fact that I have to be the person who has her then have to have this like eyes behind the back of her head type of thing. Mm-hmm. That feeling, because that's what racism is so adaptive. It's dynamic. It's not static. Mm-hmm. That feeling, right, of, am I crazy or is it because I'm black? Am I paranoid or is that a black thing? Because that's where it is now, and that's where it drives you crazy, right? And when do I give her that burden to carry?
So what conclusion did you come to?
The story's been written. At this point,
right.
At this point, she's 4. You know, she loves her friends. She loves Jesus.
Right.
And I just fill her up with love and self-pride, and just hope that I can give her the armor of God and, you know, the armor of knowing who she is and self-love, that when the world tries to chip away at her, she has enough left over.
Right.
Wow.
Thank you.
Lucky little girl.
Mm-hmm.
What character in the book resonates with you and why? The book or the movie, if you haven't seen them, read the book. I'll start off with Julia.
Because well, maybe could I just say that family unit?
Yes.
Because it just really was so strong. And you know, you can say you're a little jealous of that, maybe. You know, even though they went through so much. Because she also had that uncle, we haven't really talked about him yet, in the police force, who, so she had like 2 dads, and 7. What an amazing brother.
Right.
You know, you have your own, you know, family, and boy, you know, you're always fighting with your brothers. I don't remember them supporting me so much, you know, and I'm thinking, wow, is it because they needed each other so much and they learned that, and so you become strong because of that. And maybe when you don't have a lot of challenges, you are weaker.
Right.
So I loved the family. I loved that family. One thing we haven't talked about, there was a lot of humor in this book. And I loved how they talked to each other, you know, just the little quips, and even the relationship between the mom and the dad, even when they were angry with each other. There was just a lot of good dialogue. She's a good writer. That's all I want to say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Sean?
I resonate with Maverick, the father, and 7, you know, because Maverick, I remember in the beginning of the movie, you know, him teaching his kids, you know, the Black Panther, the 10-point system. I was like, I said, I can't wait. When I have kids, I'm going to do that. Because it's very important. I like the pride he instilled in his children. 7, I could relate to him because he's young, and you know, he was a rider. He really rode for his sister to the end till he almost died. So I definitely can see myself, you know, and his loyalty still with, even though his mother, that wasn't his like biological mother, and those were his half siblings, but his loyalty still with his siblings and his sister, especially in the time of need. So I definitely see myself as them.
I think for myself, I think the character that I related to the most was obviously the mother. She loved her children fiercely. and was very protective of them. And just as a mom, I just related to her character and how she, I really liked the relationship that her and her husband had as well. They really stuck together as a unit for their family. So.
Thank you. Trey?
I was probably, I could relate more to Starr, but I said this to Sophia last night. My dad was Maverick, like,
Wow.
like not far as like, you know, the Black Panther, but like far as just talking about the police. And it was a scene where the house got shot up and the dad went back. That was what my dad would have did, you know. Like hands down. That was my dad. And I'm trying to think about another.
What about Khalil?
Khalil was his character was strong. That was crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't even think, well, because I never seen a preview. I seen a preview, but I didn't really watch all the way through it.
Right.
But that scene where he just reached inside to grab a brush was kind of like that really could happen. That's the crazy thing. Like that was it was realistic. Like. But Starr, I think I related more to Starr a lot because Starr was just like far as like I said, the two personality thing, the just coming home, like it's like you could just come home and that like you can't escape where you live, like you can have like a different personality, but you just can't escape where you live,
right?
And that was really it.
Malik?
I would say my life in general, as it stands right now, is a mixture between Maverick and Uncle Carlos. So, just from how I was raised and where I was from, and understanding the streets, but then like navigating life in a way in which I'm trying to do better for myself, but not forget about my community, right? Kind of like the Sankofa bird, right? But then I have this duty, like Uncle Carlos, because for my main job that I do, I'm a parole officer for the state of Connecticut, right? And with that, you have this balance of trying to uphold the laws of the law enforcement officer, but yet serve your community, and understanding that because you understand the community. And me being from Southeastern Connecticut, so I run halfway houses. I have one in Groton that I run, and with that being known, the idea is that I give people from come out of incarceration what I believe is the best chance to be successful and reintegrate themselves back into the world and reunify themselves with their families.
Right.
But I still have to uphold what is right and what I believe is right, right? But there are times, like with Uncle Carlos, that you're put in situations that you might have to do your job versus what you think morally is right. And I think that balance, of knowing people sometimes that I work with, and then going the extra yard or like trying to navigate those spaces are difficult, right, at times, because I'm a law enforcement officer, but I've marched for Eric Gardner, right? I'm a law enforcement officer, but I've driven down the bus for Trayvon Martin, right? I've gone with you over and prayed over the burial site of Mike Brown in St. Louis.
In St. Louis.
Right? Because I can be both. It's not a box, right? So I see where Uncle Carlos comes from, and then I also see where Maverick comes from, because when I'm driving around in my regular car, ain't nobody worried about what I do from 9 to 5.
Yeah, they don't.
Now, for the two of you, Julia and Malik, you two have read the book. Okay? What would you say is the difference between, for the listeners, for the people who are listening and, who are just like, well, maybe I don't have enough time to read the book. I'm just going to watch the movie and I'll be okay. Why should they read the book? And how is the book a little bit more insightful for them, where they can maybe understand these issues that we are discussing this evening? The complexities, how would it go, how does the book go a little bit deeper? Please.
Well, I had the luxury of reading the book, I want to say a year and a half ago, and seeing the movie probably 6 months ago, whatnot, when it came out in the movie theaters.
Yep.
There are things that are interesting. In my mind, Starr was a dark-skinned girl, right? But it's all in my mind, right? But she was, though. But in the movie, and they, and from what I was able to read on reviews, they made her light-skinned so that she would appeal more to people of lighter skin. Which, historically, right, is something that brings up resonations of
Colorism.
right,
Right.
and that bothers you with such a great book, right? Uncle Carlos isn't as complex as he is in the book. They don't show him getting into altercation with the police officer that shot the young man. They don't show like his struggle with things, right? They kind of show him very to a point one-sided, right? His love for Starr, but just one-sided. I felt like there were good parts about the movie though, like the relationship between Chris and Starr, the how they narrated the spaces she was in, and her relationship with, was it Haley, I believe, and things like that were very believable. Did a great job, because what happens is that we can think that, like when Chris says, "I'm not being racist," one thing that we forget is that it's only been about, let's say, 30 years. I'll give it 35, maybe 40, but that's being generous. Where not being a racist is a bad thing. Where you don't want to be called a racist, and we get this like big bad wolf idea of like this person has to, be trying to, lynch you to be a racist. Where truthfully, right, they're the microaggressions and the ignorance and the assumptions and the superiority and the systematic oppressions that happen, right, that are racist. And you could be a person that is not racist, right, because we just want to blanket you out, but do something that is. You could have good intentions and do something that can come off, right, as bias, right? But we're so afraid of being labeled that word that we'll just negate whatever is said sometimes. And I think that this book did a good job of showing, like, hey, why did you unfriend my Tumblr? Because I showed a picture of Emmett Till. Why did you, right? Because we do little things that are little to you, right? Might be a pebble in a pond to one person, but it's a boulder in a puddle for another person, right? And there are things that can be said or that can be ignored that I feel those, but because you don't, right? You think I'm crazy or I'm making it up, right? It's like as if like the wind was blowing in here and I feel it, but you don't, and you don't want to listen to me. But it's truthful that I do feel that.
Julia?
Yeah, for me, always a book is that you can picture it in your own head and create your own movie, and then you go to the movie and see how close, how they ruin it now. But anyway, and I love this book too because it does go into the head of every character.
It does.
And I'm not sure, I haven't seen the movie yet, of course I will, but to go into the head of every character, then you get to see that, the concerns are maybe surprising. You get so much more depth, right? You learn so much more. You even, like, things like the Black Panther 10-point system, I'd heard a couple of them. I didn't know all of them. Now I'd like to read, find out what they all are. I mean, they seem very human to me, right? So, there's just so many things you learn when you read a book, and you can go back over a chapter, or you can't do it in a library book, but you can highlight, quotes that you love, because I was there. There was a couple quotes in here that I love that would be something I would go back to and write down. So for me, a book always gives me more. It just gives me more. So that's what's important to me.
Oh, thank you. Some people say it is so hard to stay positive. It's so hard to just, because I have so much going on. What words would you have for them who are listening this evening listening to the show, saying, I don't know if I can, I go through a lot, I deal with a lot, and sometimes it's just very hard for me to stay positive and help people and encourage people. What words would you have for them?
Yeah, I was thinking, but no, what really came to mind is to, I don't want to sound cliche, but keep moving, keep pushing forward, because, you have a purpose, and everyone has a purpose, and even though you might feel purposeless, you're living for someone, or you're living for something, so just have that in the back of your mind, and because that keeps me going, that allows me to remain positive at times, even when times may get rough. So please keep on going, and you have a purpose.
Okay. Trey?
It was a saying that Nelson Mandela said that really stuck out to me when I was younger. I am the master of my fate, and I am the captain of my soul.
Can you say that again, please?
I am the master of my fate, and I am the captain of my soul. That, to me, that means you're not gonna make me do what I don't want to do. You just got to keep a good head on it. Just keep moving.
Thank you. Melanie?
I think with what Sean said was, I think that when you're dealing with whatever you're dealing with in your own life, sometimes it's hard to see outside of yourself. But when you see that your behavior and your attitude changes other people's lives, it's easier to stay positive.
As we get, it's been 2.5 years now, and 45, who is our current president, there's been a lot of changes in our political climate, and there's been a lot of hate that we have seen throughout the nation in the past 2.5 years. From building a wall to the government shutdown, which is going on almost 31 days now. People, they can't even feed their families. People can't even pay their rent, and they can't pay their mortgage. And it's all over greed and money. And when you look at even what has happened in Charlottesville, and what has happened to children in detention centers, children being taken away from their parents, a lot of hate that we have seen. With this closing question here for all of you, what advice, a quote, statement, because there are a lot of listeners right now who are listening to this show, and they're just like, I don't know what to do. The hate you give, to me, seems like that's just part of our culture in this nation. We have hate when it comes to race, gender, adultism, weightism, everything. Just people always hate. Hurt people hurt people. What advice would you have for those individuals, each one of you? Can you leave some of these listeners this evening? Because people need it. People desperately need it. People are struggling. Starting with Melanie.
I read a quote yesterday, trying to find it. Can you go and come back?
Yeah, Sean?
I would say to not only to keep hoping or have faith, but also to be the vessel and be the tool to make change, because it starts with you, and not only holding conversations but having action. What policy needs to be changed, because at this point things need to be dismantled, because we can have conversations but things just need to be dismantled and actions just need to be put in place, and you can be the start, you can be the change, and be the vessel.
Thank you.
That's wonderful.
It's perfect.
That's great. And I guess just this Martin Luther King quote yesterday was the idea of, what are you doing to, it doesn't have to be big. We just have to keep hoping and doing. And I guess we talked about the idea of why. I guess, again, I have 4 grandchildren. It just, as you get older, you think you have nothing left to give, but then the generations come behind you, and how can you not want a better world? So again, I just think it's fear, and I think it's education and just understanding, just trying to understand instead of just closing your mind. So keeping minds open is really important.
So the quote that I read was also a Martin Luther King Jr. quote
Can you
was,
speak it to the mic?
"If I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way."
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great book. Small Great Things.
Mm-hmm.
Great book.
Trey and Malik?
It's possible to go on no matter how impossible it seems.
Thank you.
Before I get into that, just a quick context on when I said to Booker about wanting to come here and do this. It started about 2 years ago. I was at church and I was talking with my church secretary, and she's a white lady in her mid-40s. And we knew each other. We had that, that Christian love, that kind of I see you every Sunday, right? Say hi and smile. But then she started, a couple things had happened in the world, and she started asking me some questions. And she started thinking that I was an ally to help her, answer some of these questions or have conversations that she felt safe. And what it led us down to was that, that idea about knowledge, right? Get informed. And so what I did was that instead of having her do it herself, we did it together. So we read books like The Hate You Give, Small Great Things, Ghost Boys, Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. There was a ton of books that we read in about 18-month span. And between chapters and books, and at different times we just called and talked, or I showed up at the office and we just spoke about it. And through the talking of that led us into stuff within our church, stuff within society, ways that we can support each other, ways that and it grew this relationship where I have with her now, where we both learned so much, but we both understood that it broke down walls for me that I didn't know I had. Right? The trauma sometimes of being ostracized, then you put up a wall and you're like, well, I can only give white people but so much of me. And at this line I can't continue because they won't get it. They won't see it. They'll say X, Y, and Z. And when we went past that, right, it gave me more room and more love in my heart and more understanding and trust, really. And that meant a ton to me, because I went in there thinking I was only going to teach her something. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't know how apprehensive or how uncommon it was for her to have these conversations about race and to talk about it and to see, and how much she just learned from how much you just don't know. Because in my conversation is that in my world, white people always have feelings, and I understand their world and their cultural norms. But I just don't get how you don't see and understand mine. And it's just from simply just a homogeneous environment and no access. But she now has the want, and I can't be worried about what was before, only what is. And she has the want, and we have to grow together, and we've been doing that. So just wanted to make sure I said that part. And to talk about positivity, obviously from Tupac, keep your head up, right? But Martin Luther King, when he gave his speech, I know we've been referring to Dr. King, and probably because the holiday just passed. His "I Have a Dream" speech. It wasn't an "I Have a Dream" speech at first. He had a whole written out speech, and at one point in the middle of his speech, he moves his paper to the left side, and he does that the minute he hears his favorite gospel singer, Mahalia Jackson, yell to him from the crowd, "Martin, tell him about the dream." The dream that he talked to her about the night before. Mm-hmm. And he put his pre-written speech to the side, and you see the life come into him, and then you get a sermon, right? You see the Spirit talking, and that's when you have the dream. So when I think of that dream, I would say for us to dream with our eyes open. Mm-hmm. When I think about that hilltop that he was at, and he speaks about, I want to know what that looks like. I want to know if we can fulfill that. Because the two quotes I wanted to leave with were, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. So silence is an action, and we can't be. right? Regardless of who we are, or because of who we are, we can't be. And lastly, when we talk about hate, darkness does not drive out darkness. Only light does that. Hate does not drive out hate. Only love does that, right? And we're born to love, and we have to find that.
Thank you. Awesome. I just want to say to my panelists, thank you so much for taking the time out. It's an honor and a pleasure to be among all of you. You're such extraordinary individuals. And I just want to leave the audience with a quote by M.K. Asante, who's a professor at Morgan State University. He says, when you make an observation, you have an obligation. Now, you made an observation tonight about what we're dealing with in this country and some of the issues and how people have to navigate through certain spaces. So you have an obligation to be part of these courageous conversations. When I was in college, my freshman year of college, I had a roommate. And I remember it was like it was yesterday, the first night. We sat down and I laid in my bed, and my roommate was from one of those predominantly white towns. And he never ever had anyone, he never saw a person of color in all his years in school. And he sat down, he's laying in the bed, and we're both laying there, and it's like late at night, and he says to me, he says, Kevin, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah. He says, do all black people wash their hair? This is what I had here. and I say, well, yeah, you know, it depends on the texture. And I said, do all white people wash their hair? And he says, well, it depends on the white person and everything as well. And I said, oh. And then he asked me another question. He says, are all black people the same color? I said, well, do I look like Wesley Snipes? I'm not that dark. And I said to him, I said, are all white people the same color? And he says, no, we're different shades as well of whiteness. And I said, wow, you know, I never knew that. And then he looked at me and he says, Kevin, do black people get a tan? I said, well, it depends on the shade of the black person. If the rays and the sun rays and everything, we're all different shades too as well. And I said, do all white people tan? He said, well, some white people burn. And the moral to the story, what I learned from my awesome roommate at that time was he had courage, but I also had the opportunity, I gave him the opportunity to listen. So it took both of us in that room to have courageous conversations. Both of us to have that dialogue. And that's where we have to work on when it comes to hate and work through this in this country. We have to continue to have dialogue so that we can move forward as a nation. So I want to thank all of you on this panel for having this dialogue for those listeners here. So as M.K. Asante says, when you make an observation, you have an obligation. And the late Tupac Shakur said, if I fail, and he wrote this when he was in high school, he said, if in my quest to achieve my goals, I stumble or crumble and lose my soul, those that knew me would easily cosign there was never a life as hard as mine. No father, no money, no chance, and no guide. I only follow my voice inside. If it guides me wrong and I do not win, I'll learn from my mistakes and try to achieve again. Sometimes we make mistakes when we have conversations with others. We may say something that we're like, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. But learn from it, grow from it, because that's what it takes. We're human. We're not perfect. Imperfection also helps you to grow and continue to grow as a person. So thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Groton Public Library.